The major goal of this section of the course is to teach you about control statements in Matlab. Learning to use control statements is really key to unlocking the power of Matlab and taking your Matlab programming skills to the next level. That's because control statements allow you to design flexible code that can make decisions and work flexibly to process and route data. So there are 5 types of control statements that I'm going to teach you about in the following videos. However, all control statements have the basic kind of primordial soup. They all have the basic same architecture. And so I'm going to start this video by introducing this basic architecture, and then I will show you 2 of these specific control statements, if statements, or sometimes called if-then statements, and also switch statements. So the basic architecture of all control statements looks a little bit like this. They start off with a conditional statement, and a conditional is a statement that returns a Boolean value, so true or false. Next comes the content of the control statement. This is all the code that gets run when this conditional is true. Some control statements additionally have alternatives that would be run when this conditional is false. So when this conditional is true, this part of the code will be run and not this. And if this conditional is false, then this content is not run and the alternatives are run. And then we have an end statement that lets Matlab know that this control statement is finished. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to start by talking about if statements. If statements or if-then statements in Matlab are easy to understand because you use these kinds of control statements all the time in your day-to-day life. So here is an example. So we would say if it is raining, so if the state of raining is true, then we bring an umbrella, and that's the end. Or if the state of raining is false, so if it's not raining, then we don't run this code, we don't bring an umbrella. Instead, or in this case it's called else, we bring our sunglasses, and then that's the end of the if-then statement. So you can see here is the conditional. This is a Boolean, it returns true or false. This is the content, the code that gets run if this is true, and then we have alternatives here when this statement here, when this Boolean is false. Okay, so now let's switch to Matlab and we can check out some real examples of this kind of construct. So this is our if statement. You can see these are reserved keywords in Matlab. They are colored light blue, and it's not possible to create variables or functions that have these names, if or then. So here's our conditional. If 4 is greater than 5, and this is going to return true or false. Now I assume that this is going to return false. We can run this. It returns 0 as a logical, so in fact this is false. Now that means that when we run this code, it's actually not going to print out anything. Matlab won't print out anything. And that's because this is false. There is no alternative. There's no else statement here. So this line of code does not get run. Okay, now you can see an alternative. So if 4 is greater than 5, we already know that this statement is going to be false. So this line of code is not going to be run. However, in this particular example, which is different from this example, we have an alternative here. So it says else. So this is the code that gets run when this statement is false. So let's see. So we can run this and we see that it prints out, phew, everything is normal. There's something else I would like to point out here, which is this double single quote. Maybe I should have said 2 single quotes. So that's how you would get a single quote to print out. And that's because single quotes are used to indicate or demarcate the boundaries of strings. So if you would only have 1 single quote here, then actually Matlab is interpreting this to mean that this is the string. You can see this is colored differently. So now Matlab thinks this is no longer the string, and yeah, it's producing an error because it doesn't really know what to do. So to get a single quote to print out in Matlab in the command window, you have to use 2 single quotes. So it's not a double quote. You can also use a double quote, of course. Then it's going to print out like this, but this is not correct. This is not grammatically correct. We want a single quote to print. So we type one single quote and then another single quote. All right, so here we have some more examples. So far, I've shown you the basic if statement. I've shown you an if statement with one else, so one alternative. And here we have multiple alternatives here. So what we're doing in this code is basically testing how big this number is. So here we're generating a random number. I haven't talked too much about the details of this function rand_n, but I have introduced it several times already. Essentially, we are just going to create a random number that is normally distributed. That's what this n is for. That means that this random number is being drawn from a distribution that has a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. So we can run this multiple times. I'm pressing F9 on my keyboard here, and each time I run it, you can see the number ends up being a little bit different. Okay, so now we say, if this variable random is greater than 2, then this gets printed. If, or not if, but else if, the random number is greater than 0, and notice this double ampersand here. This is interpreted by Matlab as and. So this says this is a conjunctive Boolean. So we have two Booleans that we're testing at the same time. So else if this random number is greater than 0 and at the same time it is also less than 2. In human language, in English, you would say that if the number is between 0 and 2, then this message gets displayed, not so big. And then here we have another one. We say if, or else if, the random number is less than 0 and it's also greater than -2. Again, you would say this in English as if the number is between -2 and 0. And then that gets printed. And then at the end here we have this final else. Now notice this is else if. So these are treated as if statements with another Boolean here. If this statement is false, then Matlab will go to this one and test. If this is true, then this gets run, and all of the rest of this is ignored, because as soon as Matlab gets one true value, or one true conditional, then the associated code is run, and then it immediately exits this control statement. But if this statement is false, then Matlab is going to go to the next one. If this is also false, then finally this statement gets run. So else gets run. When nothing else is true, then this happens to be the code that is run. Okay, so we can already figure out what message is going to be displayed. So in this particular case, this number happens to be 0.66. So that means this is going to be false. This is actually going to be true here. And then it doesn't matter, as soon as this is true, it doesn't matter what the rest of these lines of code are. So let's run this to make sure. And we see the message not so big as expected. Okay, so that is about if statements and else if statements and so on. What I'd like to do now is introduce you to another kind of control statement. This is called a switch statement. A switch statement is a bit similar to an if statement, but it has a slightly different form. So the way that this works is that you specify some variable that Matlab is going to hold in mind. Matlab is going to keep the value of this variable in mind, so to speak, and it's going to compare this animal against these different cases. So, or compare this variable. So here we specify that the animal is monkey. So in the case that animal, because that's the variable that appears after switch, in the case that this term, what appears after case, equals what appears after the switch, then we set the variable fav food, so favorite food, to be cheese. Now if this is not true, if the value of this variable is not equal to dog, then Matlab is going to go to the next case and see that it's cat and it doesn't equal cat. Here it happens to be monkey. So we say that the favorite food is bananas. And then finally we have this otherwise statement. And of course that this gets run, this code will get run when all the rest of these cases are false. So, and then we just display a message in the wild, the animal prefers to eat favorite food. So I'm going to run all the code in this cell by pressing Control Enter on my screen. And we see, or on my keyboard, in the wild, the monkey prefers to eat bananas. And now I just want to show you, so let's do some experiments. This is one of the things I like a lot about Matlab and programming languages, or Matlab in particular, because it's really great to have this interactive environment here. So we can actually test some hypotheses. So I wonder if this switch control statement is sensitive to capitalization. So what I'm going to do is change the lowercase m to an uppercase M. So now it kind of matches, the word matches, but it doesn't match exactly because of this difference in the capital letter. So now I'm going to run all this code again. And now this is interesting. We see that in the wild, the monkey with a capital M prefers to eat pizza. I don't know where the monkey gets the pizza from in the wild, but that's not really the topic of this course right here. So what we've done here is basically run an experiment with code to determine whether the switch statement is case sensitive. And the answer is yes, it definitely is case sensitive. In this video, I introduced you to the main architecture of control statements, and then I showed you how to use two specific control statements, if statements and switch statements. To be honest, I don't really use or see switch statements all that often. They do appear occasionally, so I think it's useful to know about them and to see an example of a switch statement, but I think you are going to be using and seeing if and if-then statements much more commonly. In the next video, I'm going to introduce you to for loops. Those are one of the most important control statements ever in all of programming, every programming language. So have a few minutes rest, get a cup of coffee, and I will see you in the next video.